The dust storm that rolled into Rhyolite, Nevada, that blistering afternoon in July of 1905, changed everything for Eleanor Zimmerman, though she didn't know it yet, as she stepped down from the stagecoach with her leather traveling bag clutched tightly in her gloved hands. Eleanor had traveled 3 days from San Francisco to reach this mining town nestled in the Bullfrog Hills, her heart heavy with purpose and determination. At 22 years old, she had left behind a comfortable life to claim the small homestead her late uncle had bequeathed her, a man she barely remembered, but whose final gesture had offered her an escape from a marriage her parents had been arranging with a banker twice her age. The journey had been long and uncomfortable, but every mile had felt like freedom. The town sprawled before her in a jumble of wooden buildings and canvas tents, more civilized than she had expected but still raw and unfinished. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with a mercantile, saloons, a bank with fresh paint, and various other establishments that serviced the miners who came seeking their fortunes in the surrounding hills. The air smelled of dust and opportunity, tinged with the acrid scent of ore processing from the nearby mines. Eleanor adjusted the wide-brimmed hat she wore, a beautiful cream-colored affair with a silk ribbon her mother had insisted she take, one of the few elegant things she had brought to this rough country. The wind was picking up, swirling dust devils along the street, and she felt the grit between her teeth as she surveyed her new home. "Miss Zimmerman." A voice called out, and she turned to see an older gentleman with spectacles and a suit approaching, looking decidedly out of place among the miners and cowboys who populated the street. "I'm Gerald Foster, your uncle's attorney. I've been expecting you." Eleanor shook his hand, grateful for a familiar contact in this strange place. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Foster. I appreciate your help with the arrangements." Of course. "Your uncle was a good man, and he was quite insistent that his property should go to you should anything happen to him." Foster's expression grew somber. "A tragic accident at the mine, I'm afraid, but he had already filed all the proper papers months before. It's as if he knew." They began walking down the boardwalk, Foster pointing out various landmarks. "The homestead is about 3 miles outside of town, a modest house with some acreage. Your uncle had started a small horse breeding operation, nothing too grand, but there are a few good animals there. I've had a local hand checking on them while we waited for your arrival." Eleanor listened carefully, trying to absorb all the information. The wind gusted again, stronger this time, and she had to grab her hat to keep it from flying away. Foster noticed and suggested they step into the hotel where he had secured her a room for the night. The Rhyolite Hotel was surprisingly nice, with a proper lobby and a dining room that looked clean and well-maintained. The town was booming, Foster explained, with thousands of people flooding in to work the mines and support the mining operations. There were even plans for a stock exchange building and an opera house. "You'll spend tonight here, and tomorrow I'll arrange for someone to take you out to the property," Foster said, handing her a key. "I know this must all be overwhelming, Miss Zimmerman, but I think you'll find Rhyolite has more to offer than you might expect. It's rough, certainly, but there's a real community forming here." Eleanor thanked him and made her way upstairs to her room, which was small but clean with a window overlooking the main street. She removed her hat carefully and set it on the dresser, then sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted. The reality of what she had done was settling over her. She was alone in a mining town in the Nevada desert, with no family nearby and only a property she had never seen to her name. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That evening, she ventured down to the dining room for supper, drawing curious looks from the other guests. Women were not uncommon in Rhyolite, but a young woman traveling alone was still notable. Eleanor kept her eyes on her plate and ate quickly, then returned to her room to review the documents Foster had left with her. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the sun already fierce by the time Eleanor came down for breakfast. Foster met her in the lobby with a buckboard wagon and a driver, a grizzled old man named Pete who nodded at her but didn't say much. They loaded her trunk and bags into the back, and Eleanor climbed up onto the bench seat, once again securing her hat firmly on her head. The ride out to the homestead took about 40 minutes, the road rough and winding through the scrubby desert landscape. Eleanor found the scenery beautiful in its starkness, all muted browns and greens with the blue sky stretching endlessly overhead. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks sharp against the horizon. The homestead, when it came into view, was better than she had dared hope. The house was small but solid, built of wood with a covered porch and a stone chimney. Behind it stood a barn and several corrals, and she could see horses grazing in a fenced pasture. It wasn't grand, but it was real and it was hers. Pete helped her unload her belongings, carrying her trunk into the house while Eleanor explored. The interior was simple. A main room with a fireplace and cooking area, 2 small bedrooms, and a surprising luxury of glass windows. Her uncle had left basic furnishings, and everything was dusty but intact. "The hand who's been looking after the place should be by later today," Pete said, setting down the last of her bags. "Name's Harrison something or other. Young fellow, good with horses. Your uncle trusted him." He paused, then added awkwardly, "You'll be all right out here, miss." "It's pretty isolated." Eleanor squared her shoulders. "I'll be fine, thank you. I appreciate your help." After Pete left, she spent the rest of the morning unpacking and cleaning, opening windows to air out the house and sweeping away the accumulated dust. It was hot, physical work, and she had to remove her jacket and roll up her sleeves, grateful she had insisted on bringing practical cotton dresses as well as her finer things. By afternoon, she was famished and sat on the porch with some bread and cheese she had brought from town, looking out at the horses. There were 5 that she could see, 3 mares and 2 geldings, all looking healthy and well cared for. She would need to learn more about managing them, she realized. Her experience with horses was limited to riding lessons in Golden Gate Park. The sun was beginning its descent when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Eleanor stood, shading her eyes to see a rider coming up the road at an easy pace. As he drew closer, she could make out a tall figure on a bay horse, sitting relaxed in the saddle with the confidence of someone who had been born to it. Harrison Mercer was 25 years old and had been working ranches and homesteads in Nevada for nearly a decade, having left his family's small farm in Colorado at 16 to seek his fortune. He hadn't found riches in the mines like some hoped to, but he had found something better, a deep understanding of horses and the land, and a reputation as an honest, reliable hand. When Thomas Zimmerman had hired him part-time to help with his growing string of horses, Harrison had been grateful for the steady work and the old man's quiet wisdom. Thomas's death had hit him hard, and he had been faithfully tending the animals ever since, knowing it was what the old man would have wanted. Now, riding up to the homestead, he saw a slender figure standing on the porch and realized the niece must have finally arrived. Eleanor watched the cowboy approach, taking in the worn leather chaps, the faded blue shirt, and the wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He rode right up to the porch and dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat as he did so, and she found herself looking into a sun-weathered face with startling blue eyes and dark hair that needed cutting. "Miss Zimmerman, I'm Harrison Mercer. I've been looking after your uncle's horses." His voice was deep and measured, and Eleanor noticed the way he held his hat respectfully in his hands. "Mr. Mercer, thank you for coming, and thank you for taking care of the animals. I'm afraid I don't know much about horses, so I'm grateful for your help." Harrison nodded. "Your uncle was a good man. I'm real sorry for your loss, madam. Thank you. I barely knew him, actually, but I'm grateful for what he left me." Eleanor gestured to the corrals. "Can you tell me about the horses?" For the next hour, Harrison walked her through the property, explaining each animal's personality and needs, showing her where the feed was stored, and describing the routine her uncle had established. He was patient and thorough, never condescending, and Eleanor found herself appreciating his straightforward manner. "Your uncle was breeding quality stock," Harrison explained as they leaned on the corral fence, watching the horses. "That mare there, the sorrel, she's particularly fine." He was planning to breed her to a stallion over at the Mitchell Ranch next spring. Could get a good foal out of that pairing. "I'll have to learn all of this," Eleanor said, feeling somewhat overwhelmed. "I grew up in San Francisco. This is all very new to me." Harrison glanced at her, and she thought she saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Plenty of folks come west without knowing what they're getting into. The ones who make it are the ones willing to learn. I can help if you'd like. I've got some free time in the evenings and on Sundays." "I would appreciate that very much, Mr. Mercer. Though I should warn you, I'm not sure how much I can afford to pay you right now." "Your uncle already paid me through the end of the month," Harrison said. "After that, we can work something out." "I'm not looking to get rich, madam, just to make an honest living and work with good horses." They settled on an arrangement where Harrison would come by 3 times a week to help with the heavier work, and to teach Eleanor what she needed to know. As he mounted his horse to leave, the wind suddenly gusted, much stronger than before, and Eleanor felt her hat lift from her head despite the ribbon tied under her chin. The ribbon snapped, and the beautiful cream-colored hat went sailing through the air like a tumbleweed, bouncing and rolling across the dusty yard toward the open desert. Eleanor cried out in dismay, her hand flying to her now disheveled hair. It was her mother's last gift, and despite everything, she treasured it. Harrison didn't hesitate. He spurred his horse into motion, leaning low over the animal's neck as he galloped after the wayward hat. Eleanor watched in amazement as he chased it across the scrubland, horse and rider moving as one unit. The hat tumbled and flew, caught by the capricious wind, but Harrison stayed with it, closing the distance with practiced ease. Finally, about 200 yards from the house, he caught up to it. Harrison leaned down from the saddle in one smooth motion and scooped the hat from the ground, then turned his horse and came trotting back. His own hat had nearly blown off in the chase, and there was dust on his shirt, but he was holding her hat carefully, almost reverently. Eleanor had walked out to meet him, and when Harrison rode up, he dismounted and approached her, holding out the hat. But instead of simply handing it to her, he gently brushed off the dust with his hand, taking care not to damage the silk ribbon or crush the brim. Then, with a gesture that was somehow both courtly and utterly natural, he stepped close and placed it back on her head, his fingers briefly touching her hair as he helped settle it in place. Their eyes met, and Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest, a flutter she hadn't expected. Harrison's hands were rough and calloused, but his touch had been so gentle, and his eyes held a warmth that made her breath catch. He seemed to realize how close they were standing and stepped back quickly, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "You'll want to get that ribbon fixed," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Wind out here doesn't forgive much." "Thank you," Eleanor managed, her own cheeks warm. "That was quite impressive riding." Harrison settled his own hat back on his head and shrugged, but she could see he was pleased. Just didn't want you losing something that mattered to you. I'll see you day after tomorrow, Miss Zimmerman." She watched him ride away, her hand resting on the hat, and realized she was smiling. When she went back into the house, the loneliness she had felt earlier had diminished somehow, replaced by a small spark of anticipation. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor threw herself into learning everything she could about managing the homestead. Harrison proved to be an excellent teacher, patient but not coddling, and she discovered she had a genuine interest in the horses. The work was hard and sometimes frustrating, but there was a satisfaction in it that her previous life had never offered. Harrison came by 3 times a week as promised, always in the late afternoon when his other work was done. He taught her how to properly feed and water the animals, how to check their hooves for stones, how to spot signs of illness or injury. He showed her how to mend fence and stack hay, how to manage the water pump and keep the barn organized. But it wasn't just the practical lessons. As they worked side by side, they began to talk. Harrison told her about growing up in Colorado, about leaving home young and learning the cowboys' trade the hard way. He spoke of the beauty he had found in the desert, the way the light changed the landscape hour by hour, the satisfaction of working with animals that trusted you. Eleanor, in turn, found herself sharing things she had never expected to tell anyone out here. She told him about San Francisco, about her parents and their expectations, about the arranged marriage she had fled and the fear that had driven her to accept her uncle's bequest sight unseen. Harrison listened without judgment, his steady presence somehow making it easy to be honest. "I think you're brave," he said one evening as they sat on the corral fence watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Coming all this way on your own, starting over. That takes courage." "I didn't feel brave," Eleanor admitted. "I felt terrified, sometimes I still do." "Fear and courage aren't opposites," Harrison said quietly. "Courage is being afraid and doing it anyway. You're doing fine, Miss Zimmerman, better than fine." She looked at him, at the strong profile silhouetted against the sunset, and felt that flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. It was becoming harder to ignore the way her heart lifted when she saw him riding up the road, the way she found herself looking forward to their lessons, the way his rare smiles made her want to smile in return. The problem was, she wasn't sure how he felt. Harrison was unfailingly polite and respectful, always keeping a proper distance except when the work required otherwise. He called her Miss Zimmerman and never lingered longer than necessary. She couldn't tell if the warmth she sometimes saw in his eyes was real or just her imagination. 3 weeks after her arrival, Eleanor made her first trip back to Rhyolite to buy supplies. Harrison offered to accompany her, saying he had business in town anyway, and she accepted gratefully, still not entirely confident handling the buckboard on her own. The town seemed even more bustling than when she had first arrived, the streets crowded with miners, merchants, and freight wagons. Harrison helped her down from the wagon and insisted on carrying her shopping list, guiding her to the mercantile with the best prices and the most honest scales. Inside the store, Eleanor was examining bolts of fabric when she heard a familiar female voice. "Well now, this must be the mysterious Miss Zimmerman I've been hearing about." Eleanor turned to see a woman about her own age with red gold hair and a friendly smile, dressed in a practical calico dress. Behind her stood another woman, older, with kind eyes and gray streaking through her dark hair. "I'm Margaret Foster," the younger woman said, extending her hand. "Gerald Foster is my father. He mentioned you'd arrived. This is Mrs. Sarah Henley. She runs the boarding house on 5th Street. Eleanor shook both their hands, pleased to meet other women in town. Margaret, it turned out, was a teacher at the small school that had recently opened, and Sarah was a widow who had come to Rhyolite with her late husband during the first boom and stayed on after his death from pneumonia. "You must come to dinner," Margaret insisted. "Tomorrow evening. I know Father would love to see how you're settling in, and you can meet some of the other ladies in town. We have a literary society that meets twice a month, and we're always looking for new members." Eleanor agreed, warmed by the invitation. When Harrison found her later, carrying bags of flour and cornmeal, she told him about the dinner invitation, and he nodded approvingly. "Good people, the Fosters," he said. "It'll be good for you to have friends in town." "Will you be at the dinner?" Eleanor asked, trying to sound casual. Harrison shook his head. "I wasn't invited, Miss Zimmerman, and even if I was, I'm just a hired hand. Wouldn't be proper." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a statement of fact, but Eleanor felt a flash of frustration. The social divisions that had seemed so important in San Francisco felt increasingly ridiculous out here, where everyone was just trying to survive and build something. "That's nonsense," she said firmly. "You're a skilled horseman and an honest worker. That should matter more than anything." Harrison looked at her with surprise, then something softer, but he just loaded the bags into the wagon without commenting. On the ride back to the homestead, he was quieter than usual, and Eleanor wondered if she had offended him somehow. When they arrived, Harrison helped her unload the supplies, then lingered as if he wanted to say something. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, "Miss Zimmerman, I appreciate what you said in town, but things are the way they are. You're a property owner, educated, from a good family. I'm a cowboy who barely knows his letters. People would talk if they saw us being too familiar." "I don't care what people say," Eleanor said, but even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't entirely true. She was trying to build a new life here, and reputation mattered, especially for a woman alone. "Maybe you should," Harrison said gently. "You're going to be living here a long time, and you'll need this community. I'm not worth risking that." He rode away before she could argue further, and Eleanor went into the house feeling troubled and confused. Was he warning her away because he felt nothing, or because he felt too much? She couldn't tell, and the uncertainty was maddening. The dinner at the Fosters' house the next evening was pleasant and welcoming. Eleanor met several other women, including the wife of the bank manager, a doctor's widow who was studying to become a nurse herself, and two sisters who ran a successful bakery. The conversation was lively and intelligent, ranging from local politics to books to the challenges of living in a mining town. Gerald Foster asked after her property, and Eleanor found herself talking enthusiastically about the horses and what she was learning. "I've been very fortunate to have Harrison Mercer helping me," she said. "He's been teaching me everything I need to know." She noticed Margaret and her father exchange a look, and Margaret said carefully, "Mr. Mercer has an excellent reputation. Everyone says he's honest and hardworking." "But," Eleanor prompted, sensing there was more. "No, but," Gerald said quickly, "he is honest and hardworking. You're lucky to have his help. Just be mindful, Miss Zimmerman. A young woman living alone with a young man coming by regularly, people will talk." "I'm not saying they should, mind you, just that they will." Eleanor felt her defenses rise. "Mr. Mercer has been nothing but respectful and professional. Anyone who suggests otherwise is a gossip and a liar." "Of course," Sarah Henley said soothingly. "No one is suggesting anything improper. We just want you to be aware. The world can be unkind to women, especially those without family nearby to support them." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Eleanor was troubled. She hadn't considered how her arrangement with Harrison might look to outsiders, but now she couldn't stop thinking about it. Was she putting his reputation at risk as well as her own? The thought disturbed her more than threats to her own standing. When Harrison came by 2 days later, Eleanor tried to act normally, but something had changed. She was more aware of every moment they stood close together, every accidental touch. Harrison seemed to sense her discomfort and became even more formal, maintaining an almost rigid distance. They were working in the barn, Harrison showing her how to properly stack hay to prevent mold, when Eleanor's courage finally won out over her caution. "Mr. Mercer, can I ask you something personal?" Harrison paused, pitchfork in hand, and nodded warily. "I suppose so, madam." "Do you enjoy coming here? Teaching me, I mean, or is it just a job to you?" He set down the pitchfork carefully, and she could see him choosing his words. "I enjoy it more than I should, probably." Eleanor's heart began to pound. "What does that mean?" Harrison removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Miss Zimmerman, Eleanor, I think you're remarkable. You're smart and brave, and you're not afraid of hard work. Every time I ride up here, I look forward to seeing you. But that's exactly why I need to keep things proper between us. You deserve better than a cowboy with no prospects." "What if I don't want better?" Eleanor said, taking a step closer. "What if I want someone honest and kind who makes me laugh and who chased down my hat in the wind?" Harrison looked at her with such longing that it made her breath catch. "People would say I was taking advantage of you. They'd say I was after your property or trying to marry above my station." "I don't care what people say," Eleanor said again, but this time with more conviction. "I ran away from San Francisco to escape living my life according to what people said I should do. I'm not going to start again now. Eleanor." Her name on his lips sent a shiver through her. "If we do this, if we let this be what it wants to be, there's no going back. This town will have opinions. Some folks will always think poorly of it." "Then let them think poorly," Eleanor said, and closed the remaining distance between them. "Harrison, I've spent my whole life doing what was expected, being who I was supposed to be. It made me miserable. These past few weeks, working with you, learning from you, I've been happier than I've ever been. Don't tell me I can't have that because of what other people might think." For a long moment, Harrison just looked at her, and she could see the war happening behind his eyes. Then slowly he reached out and cupped her cheek with his calloused hand, his touch gentle despite the roughness. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "Because once I kiss you, Eleanor, I'm not going to be able to pretend I don't care about you anymore." "I'm sure," she whispered. Harrison leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet and tentative, as if she were something precious that might break. Eleanor had been kissed before, chased pecks from suitors her parents had approved, but nothing like this. This kiss was warm and real and full of barely restrained emotion, and when they finally pulled apart, she was breathless. "I've wanted to do that since the day I chased down your hat," Harrison admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "I've wanted you to," Eleanor said, and pulled him down for another kiss. They stood in the barn for a long time, holding each other, and Eleanor felt like she had finally found something she hadn't even known she was searching for. When they finally separated, both were smiling, giddy with the newness of it all, but reality intruded quickly enough. As much as they wanted to simply exist in their own bubble, they both knew the complications they would face. Harrison insisted they should court properly, let people get used to seeing them together before anything was announced. Eleanor agreed, though she chafed at the delay. Over the next months, their relationship deepened even as they tried to maintain propriety. Harrison still came by to help with the horses, but now there were stolen kisses in the barn and long conversations on the porch as the sun set. He told her about his dreams of someday having his own ranch, and she shared her hopes of building something real and lasting with the homestead. The horses thrived under their combined care, and Eleanor discovered she had a real talent for the work. Harrison taught her to ride properly, and soon she was confident enough to ride into town on her own. The community was beginning to accept her as a permanent fixture, and while there were indeed whispers about her and Harrison, they were mostly good-natured. Margaret Foster became a true friend, coming out to visit the homestead regularly and inviting Eleanor to social gatherings in town. Sarah Henley, too, was supportive, and gradually Eleanor built a network of female friends who provided both companionship and practical help. As summer turned to fall, Harrison began talking more seriously about the future. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky, he took her hand and said, "I've been saving money. Not a lot, but some. I was thinking if you were agreeable, we could expand the horse operation. There's good money in quality breeding stock, and you've got the land and the foundation your uncle built." "That sounds wonderful," Eleanor said. "But Harrison, you know I'm not going to let you just work for me. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it as partners." "Eleanor, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you." She squeezed his hand. "And I'm telling you something else. I love you, Harrison Mercer. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, and I don't give a damn what anyone thinks about it." Harrison stared at her, and she could see emotion working in his face. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough. "God help me, I love you so much it scares me sometimes. You changed everything for me, Eleanor." "Then marry me," Eleanor said boldly. "Let's stop dancing around it. I want you as my husband, my partner in all things. Marry me." Harrison laughed, surprised and delighted. "I'm supposed to be the one asking." "Why, it's 1905, Harrison. Women can propose if they want to." "Then yes," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Yes, absolutely yes. But I'm still going to ask you properly." He kissed her thoroughly, then pulled back with a grin. "Eleanor Zimmerman, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married in November in the small church in Rhyolite, with Gerald Foster giving Eleanor away and Margaret serving as her bridesmaid. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and if some of the town's more prominent citizens chose not to attend, Eleanor didn't care. The people who mattered were there. Sarah Henley and the ladies from the Literary Society, several of Harrison's fellow ranch hands, and the friends they had both made over the past months. Harrison wore a new suit that Eleanor had helped him pick out, and she wore a dress of pale blue silk that Margaret had helped her sew. When Harrison placed the simple gold band on her finger and kissed her as his wife, Eleanor felt a joy so complete it seemed impossible that she had ever been unhappy. They held a small reception at the hotel, with cake and dancing and genuine celebration. Harrison had been worried that people would judge him for marrying above his station, but the warmth of the community surprised him. These were frontier people who understood that out here, character mattered more than background. The newlyweds returned to the homestead that evening, now truly their shared home. Harrison carried Eleanor over the threshold, both of them laughing, and they spent their first night as husband and wife in the little house that had brought them together. The winter that followed was cold but happy. They worked together to winterize the barn and ensure the horses were comfortable, stockpiling hay and feed for the lean months. Harrison moved his few belongings into the house, and they settled into the comfortable rhythms of married life. Eleanor discovered that Harrison, for all his rough exterior, was a romantic at heart. He brought her wildflowers when he found them, carved her a beautiful jewelry box from scrap wood, and never let a day pass without telling her he loved her. She, in turn, learned to cook the hearty meals he preferred, mended his clothes, and surprised him by being just as affectionate as he was. But it wasn't all domestic bliss. They had their first real fight in January, when Harrison made a decision about selling one of the geldings without consulting her. Eleanor was furious at being left out, and Harrison was defensive about his judgment being questioned. They argued heatedly, voices rising, until Eleanor stormed out of the house. She stood in the cold, shivering and angry until Harrison came out after her, his own anger having cooled. "You're right," he said quietly. "We're partners. I should have talked to you first. I'm sorry." Eleanor turned to face him, still upset but willing to listen. "I'm not angry because I don't trust your judgment. I'm angry because we agreed to make decisions together and you shut me out." "I know," Harrison said. "And you're right. I'm not used to having a partner. I've been making my own decisions for so long, I didn't even think, but I'll do better. I promise." They made up, and the making up was sweet enough that Eleanor almost thought fights were worth it just for the reconciliation. But more importantly, they had learned how to navigate conflict together, and that was a skill that would serve them well. As spring approached, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be sure before saying anything. When she finally told Harrison one evening over dinner, his face went through a series of expressions so rapidly she almost laughed. Shock, joy, fear, and then a fierce protective love. "A baby," he said, wonderstruck. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy?" Harrison got up and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she squeaked in protest. "Eleanor, I'm terrified and thrilled, and I can't believe I get to have this, have a family. Yes, I'm happy. Are you?" "So happy," Eleanor said, and burst into tears, which she blamed on her condition and which made Harrison panic until she reassured him she was fine. The pregnancy was mostly uneventful, though Eleanor found the summer heat oppressive and had to reduce her work with the horses as her body changed. Harrison became impossibly protective, trying to prevent her from doing anything strenuous, until Eleanor firmly told him she was pregnant, not made of glass. "I'm going to worry," Harrison said stubbornly. "Get used to it." "And I'm going to keep living my life," Eleanor countered. "Get used to that." They compromised, with Eleanor accepting help with the heavier tasks and Harrison accepting that she was still perfectly capable of most activities. Margaret came out regularly to check on her, and Sarah Henley visited often, bringing practical advice and supplies. In early October, Eleanor went into labor. Harrison immediately panicked, despite all their preparations, and had to be firmly directed by Sarah Henley, who had arrived to help with the birth. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Harrison, pacing outside the bedroom door, feared he would lose both his wife and child. But at dawn, he heard the thin, angry wail of a newborn, and Sarah opened the door with a tired smile. "You have a son, Mr. Mercer. And your wife is doing just fine. Come meet your boy." Harrison entered the room to find Eleanor propped up against pillows, exhausted and sweaty and holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at him with such love and pride that his throat closed with emotion. "Harrison, meet Henry," she said softly, using the name they had agreed on if the baby was a boy. "Henry Thomas Mercer, after your father and my uncle." Harrison sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at his son. Henry was red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. He was the most beautiful thing Harrison had ever seen, except for the woman who had given birth to him. "He's perfect," Harrison whispered, touching one of those tiny fists with his finger. Henry immediately grabbed on, his grip surprisingly strong, and Harrison felt his heart expand in a way he hadn't known was possible. "Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for him, for us, for everything." "Thank you for chasing my hat," Eleanor said with a tired smile, and they both laughed, remembering that windswept afternoon that had started everything. Henry proved to be a healthy, loud baby who demanded attention, and kept his parents exhausted for the first few months. But despite the sleepless nights and the constant work, Harrison and Eleanor were happier than either had imagined possible. The homestead continued to thrive. As Henry grew, the horse operation expanded. Harrison's reputation as a skilled horseman had spread, and they began to get serious inquiries about breeding services and training. Eleanor, despite the demands of motherhood, remained deeply involved in the business, and her organizational skills proved invaluable. When Henry was 2 years old, Eleanor became pregnant again, and in the spring of 1909 she gave birth to twin daughters. They named them Hope and Grace, and Harrison was beside himself with joy and terror at now being outnumbered. 4 against 1, he said, looking at Eleanor and the 3 children. I don't stand a chance. 5 against 1, Eleanor corrected, her hand resting on the small swell that indicated another baby on the way. She laughed at Harrison's expression. Surprise. This time, it was another boy whom they named James, and Harrison declared they were done unless Eleanor wanted an even half-dozen. She firmly told him 4 was plenty, and he agreed with relief. The years passed in a blur of children and horses, hard work and deep satisfaction. The homestead became one of the most respected breeding operations in the region, known for quality stock and fair dealing. Harrison's dream of having his own ranch had come true in a way he never expected, not through his own accumulation of land but through partnership and love. Rhyolite itself went through changes. The mines began to play out, and the population started to decline. The grand buildings that had been erected during the boom stood increasingly empty as people moved on to other opportunities. But the Mercer family stayed, along with other families who had put down real roots. Eleanor remained active in the community, serving on the school board and helping to establish a small library. Harrison served as a volunteer lawman during the rough times and was respected throughout the region for his integrity and skill. Their children grew up healthy and happy, learning to ride almost before they could walk and developing a deep love for the land that had brought their parents together. On a warm afternoon in the summer of 1920, Eleanor and Harrison sat on the porch of their now expanded home, watching their children play in the yard. Henry, at 14, was helping his younger siblings learn to rope fence posts. The twins, now 11, were racing their ponies around the corral with James, who was 9, trying to keep up. "Can you believe it's been 15 years since I arrived here?" Eleanor said, her hand in Harrison's. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like another lifetime." "Best day of my life when that stagecoach brought you to Rhyolite," Harrison said. He still looked much the same, though his face was more weathered and there was silver threading through his dark hair. "Well, second best. The best was when you said yes." "When I proposed, you mean," Eleanor teased. She had aged too, with fine lines around her eyes and a few silver strands in her dark hair, but Harrison thought she was more beautiful now than ever. "When you proposed," Harrison agreed with a grin. "I'm glad you didn't wait for me to get up the courage. I might still be trying to work up to it." "Liar," Eleanor said affectionately. "You would have gotten there." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the life they had built together play out before them. The homestead was prosperous, their children were healthy, and they had each other. It was everything Eleanor had hoped for and more than Harrison had ever dreamed possible. "You ever miss San Francisco?" Harrison asked, a question he posed every now and then, always wanting to be sure she had no regrets. "Never," Eleanor said firmly. "This is home, you are home. I wouldn't trade this life for anything." "Even when the wind blows your hat away," Harrison said with a smile. Eleanor laughed. "Especially then, because that's when a handsome cowboy chased it down and changed my entire life." Best decision I ever made, Harrison said, pulling her close. Chasing after you. You chased my hat, Eleanor corrected. No, Harrison said, kissing her temple. I chased my future. The hat was just an excuse. As the sun began to set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and orange and pink, the Mercer family gathered on the porch. The children climbed up to sit with their parents, talking over each other about their day's adventures, making plans for tomorrow. Eleanor looked at Harrison and saw her own contentment reflected in his eyes. They had built something real and lasting here, something that would endure long after they were gone. The homestead would pass to their children, and with it, the story of how their parents met because of a runaway hat and a cowboy brave enough to chase it. Years continued to roll by, bringing both joys and challenges. When the children were older, Henry expressed interest in going to college in California to study veterinary medicine, a decision that was both exciting and terrifying for Eleanor and Harrison. They had the money saved, thanks to the success of their operation, and they supported his dream even as they worried about him leaving the homestead. He'll come back, Eleanor assured Harrison the night before Henry was due to leave. This land is in his blood. She was right. Henry did come back after 4 years, bringing with him not only a degree but also a wife, a bright young woman named Alice who fell in love with both Henry and the life he had described to her. They built a small house on the property, and Henry's veterinary practice became a valuable addition to the community, serving the ranchers and homesteaders throughout the region. The twins, Hope and Grace, were different from each other in temperament, but equally strong-willed. Hope had her mother's head for business and her father's way with horses, while Grace had inherited her father's quiet strength and her mother's love of learning. Hope stayed to help run the breeding operation, eventually marrying a good man named Robert Sanderson who worked for the railroad. Grace became a teacher like Margaret Foster before her and moved to Carson City, though she visited often. James, the youngest, turned out to be the best horseman of them all. By the time he was 15, he was breaking and training horses with a skill that amazed even Harrison. He had a gift for understanding the animals, a patience and intuition that couldn't be taught. He took over more and more of the training side of the operation as Harrison got older. As Eleanor and Harrison entered their 50s, they began to step back from the day-to-day operations, trusting their children to carry on what they had built. It was a strange feeling, letting go after so many years of constant work, but also liberating. They took the time to travel a bit, visiting Grace in Carson City, and making a trip to San Francisco so Eleanor could show Harrison where she had grown up. It was strange being back in the city after so many years, and Eleanor found she felt like a stranger in the place where she had spent the first 22 years of her life. Her parents had both passed away years earlier, and the old house had been sold to strangers. "Do you regret not reconciling with them before they died?" Harrison asked as they walked through the city streets. Eleanor considered the question seriously. "A little," she admitted. "I wrote to them several times, but they never responded. I think they died still angry that I defied them." "That's sad, but it was their choice. I gave them opportunities to know their grandchildren, to see the life I built. They chose not to take them." "Their loss," Harrison said firmly, taking her hand. "Absolutely their loss," Eleanor agreed. They returned to Rhyolite, or what remained of it, with relief. The town had shrunk considerably from its boom days, but the families who remained had formed a tight-knit community. The Mercers were elder statesmen now, respected and consulted on matters large and small. In the evenings, Eleanor and Harrison would still sit on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. Their hands, now marked with age spots and wrinkles, still fit together perfectly. Their love, tested by time and circumstance, had only deepened. "Do you remember what you said to me the day we met?" Eleanor asked one evening. "When I told you I didn't know much about horses," Harrison thought back. "I said the people who make it are the ones willing to learn." "I learned," Eleanor said with satisfaction. "We both did." "We did," Harrison agreed. "And we built something worth having." As they entered their 60s, Harrison's health began to decline. Nothing dramatic at first, just a gradual slowing down, joints that ached more, a cough that wouldn't quite go away. Eleanor fussed over him, and Harrison grumbled about being mothered, but secretly he loved her attention. Henry, with his medical knowledge, kept a close eye on his father. "His heart is weakening," he told Eleanor privately. "He needs to take it easier." Eleanor convinced Harrison to finally retire fully, turning over the last of his responsibilities to James and Henry. At first, Harrison chafed at the forced inactivity, but gradually he came to appreciate the slower pace. He spent his days working on small projects, playing with his grandchildren when they visited, and sitting with Eleanor. They had been blessed with 7 grandchildren so far, with more likely on the way, and Harrison delighted in them all. He taught them to ride, told them stories of the old days, and spoiled them in the way grandparents do. One afternoon in the spring of 1935, as cherry blossoms bloomed in the small orchard Eleanor had planted years ago, Harrison and Eleanor sat on their porch as usual. Harrison had been quieter than normal, and Eleanor knew he was in pain, though he tried to hide it from her. "Eleanor," he said suddenly, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" she asked, worried by his serious tone. "I need you to know that these past 30 years with you have been everything I ever wanted and more than I deserved. You took a chance on a cowboy with nothing but his horse and his reputation, and you gave me a life I couldn't have imagined. Thank you for that. Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Harrison, you're scaring me," Eleanor said, gripping his hand tightly. "Why does this sound like goodbye?" "Because I'm tired, love," Harrison said gently, "and I think my time is running short. I don't want to leave you, but I don't think I get much choice in the matter." Eleanor felt panic rising in her chest. "Don't say that. Henry said if you take it easy, you could have years left." "Maybe," Harrison said, "but maybe not, and I need to know you'll be all right. The kids will take care of you and you'll take care of them. Promise me you won't stop living, Eleanor. Promise me you'll keep going, keep the homestead alive, keep being the strong woman I fell in love with." "I promise," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But not yet, Harrison. Please, not yet. I'm not ready to lose you." "I'm not planning on going anywhere immediately," Harrison said, pulling her close. "But when the time comes, I want you to know I'm not afraid. How could I be? I got to spend my life with you. That's more than most people ever get." Harrison lived another 5 years. Years that were slower and quieter but still filled with love. He got to meet 3 more grandchildren and see Henry's daughter graduate from high school. He celebrated his 65th birthday surrounded by family, and he told anyone who would listen about the day he chased a hat across the desert and found his future. When he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cool October night in 1940, Eleanor was holding his hand. She was devastated by the loss, but also grateful for every moment they had shared. They had been married for 35 years, and she had loved every day of it. The funeral was attended by people from all over the region, a testament to the respect Harrison had earned and the lives he had touched. Eleanor stood strong through the ceremony, supported by her children and grandchildren, and when they laid him to rest in the small cemetery outside of what remained of Rhyolite, she placed on his grave a single item. The cream-colored hat with the silk ribbon, carefully preserved all these years, that had brought them together. Eleanor lived another 15 years, remaining active in the homestead operations and watching her grandchildren grow and have children of their own. She never remarried, telling anyone who asked that she had already had the great love of her life and didn't need or want another. She took up writing in her later years, putting down on paper the story of how she came to Nevada and met Harrison, how a windswept afternoon had changed both their lives. She wanted her descendants to know where they came from, to understand the love that had founded their family. On her 80th birthday, surrounded by 4 generations of family, Eleanor stood on the porch of the homestead and looked out at the land she and Harrison had built their life on. The original house had been added onto and modernized over the years, but the bones of it remained the same. The barn still stood, though it had been rebuilt twice. The corrals held descendants of the horses her uncle had started with, the bloodlines carefully maintained and improved over the decades. Great-grandma, one of her great-granddaughters asked, a girl of about 8. "Is it true that you and great-grandpa fell in love because of a hat?" Eleanor smiled and pulled the girl onto her lap. "Yes, that's true. The wind blew my hat away and your great-grandfather chased it down and placed it back gently on my head, and in that moment I knew he was special. He could have just handed it to me, but he took the time to be gentle with something that mattered to me, even though it was just a hat. That told me everything I needed to know about the kind of man he was." "That's romantic," the girl sighed. "It was," Eleanor agreed. And every day after that was romantic too, in its own way. Not in the way books describe it, with grand gestures and dramatic moments, but in the small ways, the important ways. The way he made me coffee every morning before I woke up. The way he always kissed me goodbye, even if he was just going to the barn. The way he listened when I talked and valued my opinion. That's real romance, sweetheart. That's real love. As the sun set that evening, painting the Nevada sky in shades of gold and orange, just as it had done thousands of times before, Eleanor closed her eyes and could almost feel Harrison beside her, his hand in hers, his voice telling her he loved her one more time. She passed away peacefully in her sleep a few months later, at the age of 81, and was buried beside Harrison. The homestead passed to their children and grandchildren, who continued the work Eleanor and Harrison had started, honoring their memory by keeping the land productive and the family together. The story of Eleanor and Harrison became part of family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The hat, carefully preserved, was kept in a place of honor in the main house, a reminder of where it all began. And whenever the wind blew strong across the desert, someone in the family would smile and remember the day it blew a hat away and brought 2 souls together, starting a love story that would echo through generations. Years turned into decades, and the Mercer family continued to thrive in Nevada. The homestead evolved with the times, incorporating new technologies and methods while still maintaining the core values Eleanor and Harrison had established. The story of their meeting became more than just family history. It became a touchstone, a reminder of the power of simple kindness and the courage to follow your heart. Great-grandchildren who had never known Eleanor and Harrison personally grew up hearing stories about them, about the woman from San Francisco who fled an arranged marriage to start over in the desert, about the cowboy who saw beyond social class to the person inside, about the love they built that sustained them through decades of hard work and challenge. The hat eventually became too fragile to handle, but it was professionally preserved and framed, hanging in the main house as a treasured heirloom. Beside it hung the wedding photograph of Eleanor and Harrison, their faces young and full of hope, and a later photograph from their 30th anniversary, their faces lined but their love clearly undimmed. The homestead itself became a kind of landmark in the area, one of the few properties that had been continuously operated by the same family for over a century. Researchers interested in the history of the region would sometimes visit, and the family would share their stories, always making sure to mention the hat and the chase that started everything. As the 21st century progressed, one of Eleanor and Harrison's great-great-granddaughters, a girl named Emma, became fascinated with their story. She was a student of history and decided to write her master's thesis on women homesteaders in Nevada, using Eleanor's own written account as a primary source. Through her research, Emma uncovered even more details about her ancestors' lives, finding newspaper articles about the horse operation, legal documents showing Eleanor's business acumen, and letters between Eleanor and the friends she had made in Rhyolite. What emerged was a picture of two remarkable people who had built not just a successful business but a true partnership, ahead of their time in many ways. Harrison, despite the era he lived in, had truly seen Eleanor as an equal partner, and Eleanor had fought to maintain that equality even when social conventions suggested otherwise. Emma's thesis was eventually published as a book, bringing Eleanor and Harrison's story to a wider audience. It became a minor bestseller in academic circles and was taught in some university courses on Western history and women's studies. The family was proud but also protective, wanting to make sure the core truth of the story, the love story, wasn't lost in academic analysis. On the 120th anniversary of Eleanor's arrival in Rhyolite, the family held a reunion at the homestead. Nearly 200 descendants gathered, from babies to elderly great-grandchildren who had actually known Eleanor in her final years. They told stories, looked at old photographs, and walked the land that had sustained their family for generations. A new tradition began that day. The youngest member of the family who could read, a boy of 6, stood on the porch and read aloud the opening passage of Eleanor's memoir. "The day the wind blew my hat away, I had no idea my life was about to change forever. I was 22 years old, far from home, and terrified of what I had gotten myself into. But then a cowboy on a bay horse chased after my hat with such determination, and when he placed it back on my head with such gentle care, I saw kindness in his eyes that made me think maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. I was right. It was better than all right. It was everything." As the boy read, the wind picked up, swirling through the gathered family, and someone laughed and said it was Eleanor and Harrison, still together, still in love, watching over the family they had created. It was a fanciful thought, perhaps, but it felt true in the way that mattered. The homestead continued on, adapting to changing times while maintaining its essential character. Solar panels were added to the barn roof, but horses still grazed in the pastures. Modern veterinary equipment was installed, but the training methods were still based on patience and respect, the way Harrison had practiced them. Business was conducted online now, but each deal was still sealed with a handshake and a promise, Eleanor's insistence on integrity living on. The story of Eleanor and Harrison, of the hat and the chase and the love that followed, remained at the heart of it all. It was more than just a romantic story. It was a reminder of the values that had built the family and sustained it through good times and bad. Kindness matters. Courage matters. Seeing people for who they are, not what society says they should be, matters. Love, real lasting love built on respect and partnership, matters most of all. When the wind blew strong across the Nevada desert, as it often did, the members of the Mercer family would sometimes pause in their work and remember. They would think of a young woman far from home, a cowboy with a good heart, and a cream-colored hat tumbling across the scrubland. They would think of the moment when he placed it back on her head, gentle and careful, and how that one small act of kindness had rippled forward through time, creating lives and loves and a legacy that would endure. And in those moments, they understood that the greatest adventures often begin with the smallest gestures, that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes, when the wind blows something precious away, the right person will chase it down and bring it back to you, and in doing so, change your life forever. The end of one story, Eleanor and Harrison's, had become the beginning of countless others. Their children, grandchildren, and all who came after carried forward pieces of both of them, building their own lives and love stories while honoring the foundation that had been laid. The homestead remained, solid and enduring, a testament to what two people could build when they loved each other truly and worked together faithfully. The land that had brought them together continued to sustain their descendants, generation after generation, all because one day in 1905, the wind blew a hat away and a cowboy chased it down. And every time the story was told, whether to a curious child or a visiting stranger, the teller would smile and remember that love, real love, is both simple and profound. It's in the grand gestures, yes, but more often it's in the small ones. In chasing after something precious, in placing it back gently, in seeing someone truly and choosing to stay, day after day, year after year, for a lifetime and beyond.